Hello, crafty friends! It's Alicia here with a project for Tailored Expressions. Today, I'm going to be using the new Gus and Gertie Get Crafty stamp and die set to create a cute, quick, and easy scrappy card. I don't know about you, but I seem to accumulate a lot of random cardstock scraps and don't always know what to do with them. Well, when I saw the new Gus and Gertie Get Crafty with their little leftover scraps on the ground, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pull out some of my scraps and get crafty with those. The scraps I'll be using today are Kiwi, Cookie Monster, Lollipop, and Black Licorice. I also got out a piece of sugar cube for my card base and stamping. To help me turn those colorful scraps into usable pieces for the cards, I got out my Easy Strips dies, the stitched versions, and I got out the 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, and 1/8 inch. In addition to the Easy Strips dies, I also got out additional A2 layer stacklets and frame and frame 3 cutting plate. I thought the stitching detail on the second from the largest would go well with the stitched Easy Strips. For adhesives, I'll be using Barely Art liquid glue, the Scotch permanent tape runner, Tailored Expressions 1/16 of an inch foam tape roll, and their foam sticky strips. To help with the stamping, I got out the TE Teal Misty and Just Press tool. I'll be inking up Gus and Gertie with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and I'll be doing some heat embossing, so I got out the anti-static powder tool and Detail Clear embossing powder. To color the image, I will be using Olo markers, and the individual colors will be listed in the description. Let's get crafty! To get started, I cut my piece of sugar cube cardstock into 2 pieces that were 4 1/4 by 11 inches. The first one I scored and folded in half for a top fold card base, and the second half I cut into 2 pieces, one for stamping and one to build the card front. Then I paired up those colorful cardstock scraps with an Easy Strips cutting plate and took those off camera to die cut. What I like about these is you always get uniform sizes, that nice crisp edge, and with these, the stitching detail. Now it was time to have some fun with these strips and figure out what I wanted my pattern to look like on the card front. I did play around with a couple different combinations, but finally decided on having a skinny green strip in between each of the pink and blue and alternate those. So now it was time to bring in one of those pieces of white cardstock and start building my card front. To ensure I have a little bit of wiggle time to get the strips placed just right, I will be using liquid glue for this next step. What I'm doing first is figuring out the angle I want my strips to go at and the placement with the die and the sentiment, just to ensure everything will have room later. Once I figured out the spot for the pink strip, I put adhesive all the way across the back and got it placed onto the cardstock. Make sure on this one that you rub off any extra glue on the ends. For the rest of the strips, I put the glue right on the front of the piece of white cardstock next to the strip I just placed and all the way across that. Now, because it was liquid, I would put the strip down and then make sure it was right up against the previous one. I continued with the pattern until I had the bottom of that card front all finished. While that was drying, I started working on the focal point. For this, I'm going to be stamping Gus and Gertie with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink and doing some clear heat embossing. Now, to make sure I get the powder only where I want it, I did prep my cardstock with the anti-static powder tool after I got my stamp set up, and then I got this inked up and stamped. Now, because Gus's body is a pretty solid black, I did go ahead and ink it up and stamp the image twice, and then it was nice and dark and ready for the powder to be poured over it and to be heat set. You'll see here in a minute the texture on Gus's body is so neat with that embossing powder, makes him look a little bit more furry. Now it's time to get the image colored up. The first three markers I picked out, I tried to match the cardstock colors I used, and then I knew I wanted a yellow for Gertie, so I got out Y2.3. And finally, for the wood chair and the wood table, I got out a couple shades of brown. Now for most of the image, for instance with the bird, which I will color first, I am just using a single color or a single shade per color. But when I go to do the chair and the table, I am using two just to get a little bit more depth on those pieces. I start by coloring in the chair with a lighter brown, and then I go in where there are marks or knots on the wood and add a little bit of the darker shade. Then come back in with the lighter shade once again and blend that out just a little bit. For the various crafty items and tools, I went in with those remaining three colors, which match my cardstock to finish off the image. Off camera, I did do a little bit of cleanup with the zero marker where I had went outside of the lines. Now I'm going to take this off screen and die cut it, and while I was doing that, I actually cut two white copies as well. I thought this was going to be an easy way to pop up Gus and Gertie just a little bit. To put these layers together, once again I'll be using the liquid glue just because there's lots of fine little areas, and again I would like some wiggle time to adhere those together. When I put the layers together, I put the glue down, and then I started kind of on one end and tried to match up all those little nooks and crannies so everything was aligned. Then I put the topper on there, and while that dries, we're going to finish working on the card front. For this, I brought in the frame in frame 3 cutting plate, and using the second from the largest, I cut a copy out of the black licorice. And for the strip piece, I brought in the additional A2 layer stacklets, and using the second from the largest, cut a piece from that. While I was off camera cutting those two pieces, I did go ahead and add some foam strips to the back of the frame, and I cut a Cookie Monster mat for the strip piece using the largest die from that stacklet set. I also brought in my card base, and now we can start getting the card put together. I'm going to start by adding adhesive to the back of my strip piece and getting that centered onto the Cookie Monster mat. Now, one good thing about that tape runner is if you get it put in place like you see me do here on the card front and it's not quite right, you can easily pull this up and make adjustments. Before I adhere the frame and Gus and Gertie to the card front, I need to get my sentiment stamped. For this, I'm using VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink, and to help with the placement of the sentiment, I'm going to bring in all my pieces, arrange them how I want them on the final card, and then figure out a good placement for the sentiment. For the card, I chose Crafty Friends Are the Best. I agree with that, and if you do too, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Now once the sentiment is where I think I want it, I'm going to pull in that piece of clear acetate that I always keep with my MISTI and place that on top of my card. This way I can ink up the stamp and see how it would look on the final card without actually stamping onto it. Now luckily I did a test. It needed to be adjusted just a little bit to make sure it was straight across. Once I had it at a good spot, I then removed the piece of clear acetate, inked up the sentiment, and got it on the card front. This is a great way to figure out exactly where you want your stamps to go. To help with the adhering and placement of the frame, I pulled back just a little bit of each side of the release paper from the foam tape. This way, when I go to put it down on my card and get it all set up and centered on there, it's only going to adhere part way. Once I do have it in place, I can then press down the areas where the release paper was already taken off and then remove it easily by just pulling back on those strips. To finish the card front off, I figured out exactly where I wanted Gus and Gertie to sit, and I got that added with some liquid glue. I also brought in some Tailored Expression strip drops, placed 5, kind of flowing from the upper left to the bottom right of the card front, and got those added with liquid glue and embelly jelly. On the inside, I wanted to add a little decoration, so I used some of the leftover cardstock strips and re-stamped Gus and Gertie. And here's a close-up look at the finished card. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch today's video. If you enjoyed the process, a thumbs up is appreciated. And if you're not already a subscriber, we do hope you'll click on the button below so you're the first to know about our latest videos. To find out more about the products I used today, you can check out the links in the description box below or visit the Tailored Expressions online store at tailoredexpressions.com.